this video is going to be the start of a series of videos that are going to show us how to mark out and manufacture a mobile device stand. We have one here that has been partly finished and glued up, and we have another one here that has been made and manufactured but not glued up yet, as you can see, which details our cross halving joint. It then slides together and then forms our mobile device stand. Okay. When we first start this project, we will be given 2 bits of MDF like this. We are first of all going to put our names onto each one. Okay, so I'm going to start off here with my name on both parts. From there, I'm going to label on part 1 and part 2. So part 1 goes on my larger rectangular piece here, and part 2 goes on the smaller square piece here. From here, we have to use our working drawings to help us with the next few steps. So we need to refer to them here, okay? There will be a copy of these given to you, or they will be up on the board to have a look at. We're going to have a look at part 1 to begin with. So that is this section here, the larger rectangle. We're going to come in and we're going to mark out this section of part 1. We're going to use the size that it states here of 155 millimeters. To do that, we are going to take a tool called a steel rule. Okay, so I've got my steel rule here. It is in millimeters, and the 0 starts right at the end of the ruler, unlike a normal centimeter ruler, which starts a wee bit in like a plastic one does. Okay, so I'm going to come in and ignore my part 2 piece for the time being. I'm going to mark in the measurement of 155 millimeters onto part 1. So I'm going to lay my steel rule onto the piece of MDF, ensuring that the steel rule is right up against the edge, starting where the wood starts. I'm then going to come down, look for 155. So that's me there, 150, 155, and just make a nice little mark there to begin with, nice and simple. From that, I'm going to take another tool. You have a choice of 2 tools for this section. We have a tri-square, which looks like this. This is predominantly used in woodwork, and it has a brass section in here and a wooden handle. It is at 90 degrees. It has a right angle in here, so it has a 90 degrees here, and we can use that to come in and draw a straight line across. Or we can come in with an engineering square. Often are a wee bit smaller and made fully of metal, but are predominantly used in metalwork. Okay, so it's your choice. You can choose either of these for this next step. All right, so I'm going to take my tri-square. I'm going to line it up with the MDF. The really crucial bit here is making sure there's no gap on this section of the tri-square. So right now that's not very accurate. Because we know this is 90 degrees and at a right angle, I can make sure that it's right against the MDF. No gap along this section. And on the outside of the tri-square, I'm going to use that to now scribe a line across with my pencil across the MDF. It really helps. We've got a nice sharp pencil for this, as it adds to the accuracy of what we're doing when we mark out. All right, so part 1 is there. We've measured down 155 millimeters and marked across with our tri-square. So for our next step, we now need to refer back to our working drawing. So I'm going to have a look back here. We've measured down 155. We now have our next measurement, which is 12 millimeters in here. Okay, we now have an option. We can either come in again with our steel rule, laying that down onto the MDF, and simply mark 12 off of there. So I've made a nice little mark at 12. Or what we can do is take our part 2 section of the mobile device stand, and I'm going to lay the piece of MDF along that first line, just there. Okay, and once I've laid that on, I can then come around to the other side of the MDF and draw a little pencil mark just there. Okay, and that's going to give me the thickness of the MDF. This is 12 mils thick, so you can either use the second piece of wood or your steel rule to do that. Okay, similar process. Once we've marked it out, we're now going to take our tri-square. We're going to lay that onto the MDF, ensuring there's no gap in here. I'm applying pressure this way onto the tri-square so I can get a nice right angled line off of that, and then a straight line goes on with my sharp pencil there. I've now drawn 2 lines straight across that are going to start to form the outline of my cross halving joint. Referring back to the working drawing again, I'm going to have a look at my next size that I need. The next size I'm looking for is 50. Okay, the piece of MDF you're going to be given is 100mm thick, or wide I should say. This is a cross halving joint, so as the name suggests, we're going to use half the distance. So we're going to divide 100 by 2, and then that gives us 50, which is the size in here. To put the 50 onto the piece of MDF, I'm going to take my steel rule now. Again, I'm going to lay the steel rule against the edge of the MDF. I'm going to come along till I get to 50 and make a nice little mark there that's clearly visible for myself on the center there. We are now going to join up the two sides of these lines. So I'm going to place my tri-square or engineering square on the edge. Because this is a wee bit smaller down here, I'm going to use my engineering square. It's a wee bit smaller and easier to work with this section. I'm going to lay that on, making sure it is pressed up against here, in line with this, and I can now draw a line straight across, joining up the two sections like that. Okay. So now when we have a look at our marked up version, we can see this is starting to look a bit like this one over here. However, we've got another wee couple stages to go. We've got to mark around the edge and the back to show us where the waste material is going to go. So we don't have to measure anymore for the next little bit. We can now come across to our vise. We're now going to place our piece of MDF part 1 from the mobile device stand in the vise here. This is our bench vise here. Okay, we have the handle on this side, which we can use to close the vise, and then we can use this to open the vise up as well. Okay, being really careful that we don't drop this onto our fingers. So we are wanting to use this to hold our piece of wood, so we've got a spare hand to mark out the rest of this. We're looking for our sizes to come around from this side, along the edge, and back onto the face side here. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to take my piece of MDF, I'm going to lay it into the vise. I'm going to tighten it up in the vise so it's got a nice secure fit. It's not going to go anywhere. I'm then going to take my tri-square and I'm going to line it up onto the edge of the MDF, lining up the line I've previously scribed on with the edge of the tri-square. Once I have lined it up, I can then come in and draw a line straight across. I can then slide the tri-square along a bit further, ensuring this is against the wood, applying pressure onto the MDF, and draw a second line across. Okay. From there, I can loosen this out of the bench vise, lay it flat on the table again, and I can continue these lines around onto this piece of the MDF. So again, I'm lining up the tri-square with my line here, and I'm just going to scribe that across the MDF. I'm then going to slide this down a bit more until it lines up with this section here, and draw a line straight across. From here, I'm then going to take my steel rule, once again, lay it on the back, and I'm looking for a measurement of 50mm here. So I'm lining this up so we can see it. Place steel rule on the edge, move along to 50, make a nice little mark. From here, we can take our tri-square or engineering square, lay it on the edge, make sure it is against the MDF. That'll ensure a nice straight line, and draw another line here. Our final little step now to mark out part 1 is to mark out what is the waste material and what is not. We have something called hatching lines here, which is as shown on the demo piece, and we're going to hatch around 1, 2, and 3 sides that we're eventually going to cut out, ready for our cross halving joint. So I'm just going to mark them out here. This ensures I don't get confused later on when I start to cut out the wood, ensuring I get the correct piece that I'm cutting and protecting the wood I want to keep. And that is how we mark out part 1 of the mobile device stand. We are now going to move on to marking out part 2 of the mobile device stand, as shown in the demo piece here. So we're going to mark out on 1, 2, 3 sides of this MDF, similar to our first piece on part 1. However, we're going to do the exact same process, but symmetrically. So we're putting this right down the middle, like a mirror, and we're going to copy it across the other side with some slightly different measurements on this side here. Okay. For part 2, we're going to refer to the working drawings again. So we're going to have a wee look here at this side of the page. We're going to have a look at the sizes that are shown on here. We're going to use this size of 55mm to start. Okay, so I'm going to place the demo onto the side, take my part 2 piece, I'm going to lay my steel rule on to the MDF, and I'm going to then mark down 55mm along here. So I'm coming down to 55, draw a little mark. From here, I can take a tri-square or engineering square. I have the engineering square here. I'm going to lay that onto the MDF, ensuring I've got a nice tight fit onto it. And then I'm just going to draw a nice straight line across like that. I'm making sure I'm drawing on the outside of the engineering square or tri-square and not on the inside. It can get really awkward to draw and scribe from the inside of here. From here, we can then repeat the process we did previously. We can either take our piece of MDF to give us a thickness of 12mm, or we can use our steel rule by placing that onto here and then measuring 12mm from the steel rule. So that's me looking there, 10, 11, 12mm, nice little mark. From here, I can again place my engineering square onto here, line it up and draw a line straight across. So that is the starting point of marking out part 2. We now have a look at the working drawing again and have a look at our next size we're going to take. Like we said previously, this is a cross halving joint, so this is half the thickness of the wood here, which is 50mm. So we're now going to use that size onto this section. I'm going to take my steel rule, I'm going to lay it onto the edge of the MDF along one of the lines I've just drawn on, and at 50mm I'm going to draw a little mark onto the MDF there. From here, I can take my engineering square again, line it up and draw a straight line across connecting the two. We now need to scribe the lines around the edge and the second face of this piece of MDF. To do that again, we're going to line it up into the vise. Ensuring it's nice and secure, I can then take my tri-square or engineering square, line it up with the edge of the work and draw a line across. I'm then going to line it up with the next line here and draw a line across. From here, I can then take it out of the vise, lay it flat down the bench, take my engineering square again, line it up, and then scribe a line right across, move along, and then scribe a line right across again. Okay, so I've now effectively taken these sizes from this side onto the edge and onto the back of the MDF without having to remeasure it. The last little step we've got to do here is again mark on our halfway point of 50mm. So I'm going to lay my steel rule onto the edge of the MDF there, making sure it's flush along this side, and then I'm going to line up on the 50mm a little pencil line to indicate halfway to me. From here, we can take our engineering square again and line up with that mark and draw a line to connect the two lines. We now want to mark out the wastewood that is symmetrical. Okay. So I'm now going to place my hatching lines onto here to let me know what sections of the wood I'm then going to cut out in a wee second. So I'm going to score off these sections with some hatching to let me know that that is the wastewood that will eventually be cut out to form the cross halving joint. So once we're finished, we should have part 1 looking a bit like that, part 2 looking a wee bit like that, as reflected on our wee demo pieces here.